My special guest this evening is Jerry Avalos, and he's just incredible. So let me read you his bio here. Jerry Anthony Avalos is the inventor of the Quanta Emissions Devices, CEO and president of Quanta Emissions Technology. Since high school physics, he has been fascinated with quantum mechanics and has been repairing, building, and inventing gadgets for practical use. From high school, he went to California State Long Beach and majored in computer science. In 2001, Jerry was hired as the senior graphic artist at Monsters and Motion, a premier manufacturing movie TV collectible company. In 2003, he started his own business as a creative consultant, which included graphic design, product manufacturing, packaging, web design, and web programming. Jerry is a born natural intuitive, lucid dreamer, experiencing the full gambit of what most call paranormal, metaphysical, and spiritual experiences all his life, which also includes being an unknown test subject in intuitive projects in the shadow government known as military abductions, or MILAB. Through the insight he has garnered from his nightly astral travels and daily intuits, Jerry has developed and honed various techniques for expansion of consciousness. These experiences have also given Jerry tremendous insight into principles of quantum mechanics such as entanglement, which directly translate to the products he is currently developing. His websites are quantaemissions.com and theholotree.com, and I'm going to post those in the chat for everybody. And please welcome Jerry to the show this evening. Hi, Jerry.
Hey, Solaris. Thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you on. And I know there's a little boost feedback there, so we'll try to work through that. But tell everybody what projects you're currently working on these days. What are you up to?
Oh, wow, yeah. So much fun, really. I mean, I'm in this position where one kind of would like to imagine themselves but never really expect. We had a lot of luck managing to create a very easy and low-cost device to help combustion engines run more efficient. And we're using a lot of applied frequency methods and composite materials, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But and it's been really taking off, and so in that sense, having an invention that people really see the value of has been an overwhelming privilege, really, for everyone involved. So it's been really cool, and so this has given us the opportunity to now really look at other ways to expand our efforts and offer products, but also offer little bits of help to just try for oneself, because honestly, things don't necessarily have to be secretive as a lot of people keep them. Everyone has different proficiency levels, and while we might all be able to make chicken soup, some people's chicken soup's going to be better than others, even though if we all have the same recipe. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh, exactly. Well, you're one of the better chefs, shall we say?
It seems like it. I mean, honestly, I try not to be overtly competitive beyond like a friendly, learning experience. But I mean, when enough people acknowledge your efforts, one has to acknowledge it themselves. So yeah, I guess I'm fairly proficient, shall we say?
Oh, absolutely. So your combustion device, now that's the one that saves on the fuel, right?
Yeah, in principle, it should, yes. And this is one of those things where the lawyers and such, we have to be really careful about this, because yes, it does theoretically conserve energy, I guess we can say because and I'm sure the scientific minds out there will get this, because there's so many different factors or variables into how much fuel is really spent per vehicle. It's kind of hard to say you'll save X amount of gas every time. It's almost impossible to put a number there, but it does help with that, yes.
Right, that sounds good. And of course, nowadays, all vehicles, well, most of them are run on computers, so technically speaking, that should help quite a bit. Let me ask you something real quick. What about smart meters? Do you do any devices for smart meters?
We actually have some very preliminary projects on all kinds of things, including electrical enhancement of the connectivity, helping mitigate the damages of EMF, helping things grow better, helping the body. There's so many different ways when it gets into frequency applications. That's the fun thing, because everything is vibrating on some level.
Right, and then of course there are a lot of what we call the dirty electricity is out there, which can cause a disturbance. And well, some people have very sensitive electromagnetic fields. I know people who have had massive headaches just due to the toxicity of the frequencies alone. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that, I mean, how we were talking a little bit before the show about finding common terminology, and I think that all of us we're saying that we're really talking about the same thing, and we might call it a little different terms, but we're really saying the same thing. And it's really not that outlandish to think about this hypersensitivity to this, considering there's so many different types of metals in our body. And so what we're talking about is more about an awareness of of external information or force. So it's really not as outlandish as people think of when they think of, say, even being sensitive, quote unquote, to energies. It's not a loose term, really. It's really just being aware of the already in place receptors in our body, and
Right.
be they anatomically there as a finger or just a part of the iron that's in our body that will vibrate just like any other iron on this planet.
Exactly. And I think it has a lot to do with the frequency, at what rate the vibration is happening. Normally if we do a lot of spiritual work or we're into, a higher overtone of our consciousness, we usually resonate at a higher frequency. From what I'm seeing is that people are actually getting kind of pulled into an inertia effect where there's a little bit of a distortion, I'd like to say, in the electromagnetic field. So I'm wondering, now it sounds like you do have devices for also shielding for like cell phones and computers come to mind, especially everybody always has the cell phones to their ears. What's your take on all that?
I think it's a good practice to try to mitigate one's exposure to too much of the unfocused energy or unmodulated energy, as we're kind of examining, and I guess it's fair enough to just set what I mean about energy. I'm talking about some kind of force with an implied direction, and so that direction can also be like one's concept of compassion, or it can also be like a literal EM wave pushing. They're, in a sense, they're both potential action that has a direction. And so it's important. So just going forward and kind of putting everything into context and really grounding it, in a very literal way, especially in electricity. And this is where what we look at is not necessarily how to work against things inherently, although there is counter wave measures that one can do. We're looking at ways to utilize the already in place energy or that force to help benefit, instead of working against it and causing another type of friction ultimately, which disperses energy somewhere, which we have to be responsible about as scientists if we really want to do a service. And so this is where we're looking first to work with the forces of nature, the forces of the ecology of where we're at, the environment, including the business environment, to see how to be as least disruptive as possible as we're integrating, because an abrupt change isn't always what's needed, especially not on a global mindset, in relation to things like science and practical applications.
I really like the way you think, Jerry. That's very much in alignment with what I think is really the future of where we're heading in technology, because we do have to learn to work with these technologies and not just completely negate everything that's potentially could be used as a negative, So the neutralizing, what comes to mind is neutralizing the field to some degree. And I guess you can't go into the aspect of what you do to do that, or how you work this, because that's probably one of your, I don't know if you have these secrets, but literally, I don't want to push you in those areas of exposing it, but it'd be interesting to find out.
I get you. And yeah, honestly, what we do is very, very specific. And so for me to actually give away the quote unquote secret sauce would take like hours of presentation and step by step. But the general principles are pretty much common knowledge in a lot of ways. It's like how we already made the analogy of cooking, and each chef it puts things together a little different. And so everything that we're doing is what we're seeing in modern science, be it mainstream or alternative, shall we say, because they're starting to meld. And so we're talking about, the utilization of composite materials that are structured on a sub-nano level using quantum software.
Awesome.
And so we're talking similar languages, and because you get into a different type of information exchange other than what traditionally in computers like we're using now, even a talk, would be a digital binary scenario. And so the quote unquote quantum aspect comes in, where you have to just quantify literally what you're talking about and what the cause and effect is. And as long as one can do that, then you can translate to a binary. And so that's where we're seeing all the quantum computing coming up in modern news and everything, contemporary news, shall we say.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what about patents? Are you a firm believer in patents, or do you think those are just kind of a waste of time?
I think patents have a purpose, absolutely. Because, now at the same time, Do I expect, the United States government to fight my battles as a business in terms of what I might have created? No, because that's why I think where a lot of people honestly defer too much responsibility to the government to protect businesses and their IP, because they're asking to define expression, and that's very, very difficult. And I'm not sure if the courts are the appropriate arena to do so. And so, in that sense, but at the same time, a patent is good to recognize the form of value. So if someone has a product, it's defined as this is what they made in this place and time, which is kind of like their trademark, which should lend to the credibility of the product. And really that's what is needed for, or what's desired as a business or an inventor, ultimately beyond credit, unless they're a narcissist. And if that's the case, then they usually lose anyways. So,
right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of people, some people poo-hoo the patents, but I think you have a point there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, they can be used, and this comes up all the time. I mean, I'm literally in those kind of discussions with different people every day these days about the different strategies. Because, I mean, perfect example, and it was great timing. As some of your listeners may have seen, Google and Oracle were just in court over a copyright suit where Oracle was suing Google for $9 billion for usage of JavaScript in their Android language. And now there was 11,500 lines of code out of Java that Google used in Android. And ultimately, the courts decided that fell under fair use. And so now Oracle is, obviously not very pleased with that. But then the precedent set there, though, shows that, especially on a software level, that a lot of stuff is now becoming implied public domain. So a lot of the copyrights and patents on some of the software is going to be very difficult to defend from some of these larger entities. But at the same time, the more astute ones know it's not really in their interest to pursue that, because they'd be prosecuting their own customer base and potential commoditization lines of someone who creates something cool using their platform.
Right. No, I agree with you on that one for sure. And I know you've been working a little bit. We talked a little bit off air about how you've been working with a little bit of codes insofar as number sequences connected to mind control. Do you want to go into that a little bit, or are you guided to do that? If not, that's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get into that, because this is one of the things that I think that honestly, anyone who is tuning into this radio show right now with sincere concern for the well-being of their community, needs to know that there is heavy cyclotronic weaponry and software and algorithms proliferated everywhere in electronics and bounce back and forth off the satellites all the time. So it doesn't matter if you're on the grid, off the grid, don't matter, you're getting blasted. Now, the important thing to remember, though, is that as conscious beings that walk this planet, and especially if we're conscious of this, that it doesn't necessarily have power over you. It's more of like a coercion tactic. So it's going to try to bargain with you or plead with you to do something outside of your character, but it's not necessarily going to make you do it. But it can trick you, it can hypnotize you. And now this sounds far off to maybe those who haven't necessarily heard it, but if you look at just the flicker rate of monitors and TVs, it is an entrainment device. So one goes down in their brainwave pattern to that hypnotic state. And then the use of particular archetypes in a sequence has a physiological activation effect on the fight or flight responses in our body. So it's not really that far off to think about that. And that does get into the frequency modulation, like you mentioned. And one of the more basic ways that one can express some of these universal algorithmic expressions is an amplitude modulation. So kind of like AM radio. And so these basic integers are kind of like how we see the seed of life pattern duplicated everywhere, and how even the Earth space flag is incorporating that. because that pattern will overlay over multiple associations. And so these different patterns can have numerical value. And so, for instance, one of the ones that we found that correlated with express yourself or share your thoughts kind of thing that works against the persecution shut up algorithms that might get pumped out. Some of you out there might have felt this, is an amplitude modulation code of 19842795. And so even saying that has an effect. We've tested this on some fairly extreme cases of post-traumatic stress disorder related to ritual abuse, and with profound effects. And it's been pretty interesting. And this is one of those things that does work into what people can trace to the MK Ultra programs, things like that. And so this is one of those things that helps reharmonize the sort of the latent expressive algorithms inside of a conscious being like us as humans.
That's awesome. I really, really like that. So actually, the people can actually speak this, or is there another way that you actually do you use this number sequence when you're doing radionics, or how is it normally distributed?
Yeah,
or
absolutely, it can absolutely be applied, on any radionic machine, and especially those experienced radionic practitioners might even notice part of that code as something, because what happens is a lot of sequences or amplitude modulations that are anywhere from 1 to usually 8, 9 integers, but up to like 12 are usually universal in a sense, or they're common everywhere. So this is where you're asking about our secret sauce, quote unquote. Some of it we couldn't necessarily try to copyright or patent, because so many other practitioners, and including even academic studies, have found correlations with these amplitude modulations. So it's not like something we developed. And so this is why I encourage, anyone be interested or skeptical, look into, radio bombardment of cells, or radio wave bombardment of cells, or even sound frequencies, because that's the other way that number could be translated too, because one could even set a classical music meter to that. Mm-hmm. As long as those integers are set and then represented and expressed, it seems to be effective.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to pass that along to a lot of people that I know are being affected with certain forms of technology and misuse of. So, yeah, that's fascinating. I really appreciate what you're doing here on this timeline. You're an incredible, intelligent being. So it's really, really a treat to have you on tonight.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Because really, my attitude and my partner Vanessa's attitude is that, we obviously are enjoying the same things a lot of people do. We like being able to use our internet. We like, even video games and stuff like that from time to time. And, helping as we can helps basically the ecology of the world, our standard of living. And so if everyone's standard of living gets a little bit better, then everything for everyone gets a little bit better. Now, and it doesn't necessarily mean that one has to be an activist or go out and go feed the homeless every day, but the idea that if we help our environment, or what we like to see a little more of that in general will start happening.
Oh yeah, it's an osmosis effect, and of course, if people aren't being interfered with on a type of psychotronic level, surely the bar raises in consciousness so that everybody is synced up on a positive scale, like you were discussing. So I know that it's not all the time, but there certainly seems to be a deployment of insidious projects that have been happening. Obviously, I've been through one, and I understand very clearly that there is that capability.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and this is one of those things that I think. I don't know how you feel, Solaris, but I do feel quite vindicated now over X amount of years when others have the courage to go ahead and share their stories, no matter what walk of life, be it kind of no one knows you to even some of the celebrities now who are also saying the same thing, because, it happens, and it's something that I think a lot of us take for granted, because you ask anyone on the street in any given country, in any part of the world, what about that government experimenting on the people without telling us? They're like, oh yeah, they do that, but no one really expects it to happen to them,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't necessarily know who it is, and when they do, they don't really know what it means.
Right.
You know? So
Very
and
true.
and so I think that's what I found in even just reconciling my experiences to myself. I mean, because honestly, even those who may have not heard of me, or even some, say, business associates who might be hearing this, it's not like I necessarily decided I wanted to experience these things. I was just recognized it as experiences I had, and I remember, and they were my truth. And I'd be lying if I said anything different. And then it correlated to all these other things that people were saying about some of the experimentations that different groups, be they governmental or private, they would look into those who say genes were actuated in a way that they were conscious while they dreamt, or maybe they can move things with their mind, these and stuff like that. I mean, and when I say even move things with their mind, I mean, I've literally seen this on multiple occasions. So it's not like it's just out there. It doesn't happen. It absolutely happens.
Mm-hmm.
But one has to actually go and actually try to experience it one way or another.
Absolutely. And people haven't been trained. I think a lot of the problem is that people have been slept, with the false programming since the birth and the illusion of birthing on the planet. But literally, we have these what I call avatar gifts. So when people start transcending to higher levels of their own consciousness, yeah, all these abilities are there. I know that you've touched on the MILAB experience, and I'm sure you're referring to that. And I don't know to what level you want to go into that, but I find that very interesting. But considering you and how intelligent you are and your capabilities, I'm not surprised you were pulled into some kind of a covert program. It just doesn't shock me at all.
I mean, oh, thank you. I mean, and I think, and one of the things I guess I can say that I do share with everyone else is that, we all question, are we really that good, or can we really achieve this or that? And I found that confusion of one's own identity is exactly how these things go unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
Because we question our own truth so much, and we question our own ability so much, that we just don't think it can happen.
Right.
And what I think what we're probably going to start seeing more of in relation to some of these is a lot of people are probably going to have recalls of lifetimes that are very, very real to them and very, very similar to this one, but it'll be confusing. Did they actually go in the military or not? Did they actually marry this person or not? Did they have that job or not? Because this is what we're seeing is part of this distortion that's happening due to some kind of gravitational algorithm. And so how recently in the news they're talking about confirming the presence of gravity waves. And to the lay person, what that would look like or mean is kind of like in the Matrix when the helicopter crashed into the building and everything warped like it was on a photograph.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what they're saying they confirmed happens. And so if that undulation or modulation happens of time space, that means there has to be a negative space in there.
Right.
And so that negative space is the multiverse expression, quote unquote.
That's very well said indeed. Yeah, the distortion, there's no doubt about that. I was just talking about gravity waves just the other day. Really interesting. You're right there in tune. You know what also comes to mind? I don't know if you've ever seen that show Dollhouse. I happened to watch it accidentally because I don't watch television, but it's about programming and a form of mind control and slipping in, basically using a host for programming and different experiences of false memories. And it kind of ties into insofar as I think there's a lot of bleed through effects with, well, first of all, false programmings, screen memories, and then, of course, our true multidimensional design work. So, yeah, I think they're in my opinion, they're running interference, but that's just my own take on it.
Well, I mean, in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. And this is kind of one of those places where, I know it's not necessarily the popular opinion, but now I just kind of pose this question. What if they didn't do that, it was worse? And if that was the case, what would be worse than what we're experiencing?
Interesting.
And, yeah, because this is one of the things that just recognizing my truth, and then honestly recognizing the tremendous efforts of colleagues and some personal friends of mine who in this reality, quote unquote, everything were as deep black as you can imagine, have gone through to make sure that we're safe. And it does tie into all these things for one reason or another. And it's kind of like, and I know that there's some people out there be like, what? Oh, you're saying this is for our own good? kind of, but not necessarily the way anyone really wants it. It's just the way we understand right now to do it. And so this is why we're seeing, I think, seeing so much more almost outright disclosure now in the public. You know, I mean, I just got done posting a video on my Facebook about a type of craft hovering over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I would theorize that a lot of people, especially on the coast or out there on boats, might catch more of these because this is where all those trillions and trillions of dollars for decades have gone. They've gone into these far out programs.
Right. Oh, yeah. Black Technologies Department's Black Space Program, without a doubt. So did you see that craft hovering, or is that just something you were writing about?
That was something I just saw there. But we've been seeing stuff that hasn't necessarily like materialized, quote unquote, that apparent. But now all of the geometric clouds that we're seeing, or like you're hearing a lot of people saying they're seeing square-like clouds that almost move backwards. Now, these things, now how we've heard this in ufology quite a bit about different cloaking methods or how those are different UFOs. Now, I know a lot of people, like, it's hard to kind of visualize how that would be. But now if you could, I'm sure if you get your hand in front of your face and go really as fast as you can, you start losing definition of your hand. So what if the craft was doing that, like that exact same thing in the air? And now if it's doing that, it's still creating a displacement. And so that's what explains these cloud formations of disks or cubes, or you'll see a cube bottom, because that's where the condensation point of the physical entropy of that happening is coagulating.
That makes so much sense to me. Do you ever do public speaking with the UFO conventions or anything like that?
No, I really haven't. I can't say honestly I've pursued it that much. I mean, I shared my experiences with those who thought it was interesting enough to publish. I had a radio show for a little bit, just examining, current events, interviewing other experiencers and researchers, things like that. But I never really pursued necessarily doing the presentation in that regard.
Wow, because you're just brilliant. I really like listening to what you have to say. You're refreshing because you have the same old people out there doing the same old BS. And I'm not going to mention any names, but you know what I'm talking about. So,
well, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, when you have genuine being like you, it's really nice.
Well, thank you. And I get where you're coming from. And the way I look at it is that we're all learning. And in a sense, this is all a type of educational system or school. And you need people to teach certain subjects in detail. And so like certain aspects of, say, ufology might be really old. It's like you and I, but like for those entering, quote unquote, the first grade or 101, it's like, yeah, they need to go listen to some of these people. And there's, I mean, for instance, I can mention a couple people, but not to imply they're first grade teachers. But like, say, someone like hearing Bob Dean's story, or listening to Richard Dolan's dissertations on the different verifiable cases of UFOs, Nick Pope, people like that. They're great references to start in ufology. But yeah, it has to go somewhere beyond that.
Oh, I totally agree with you on that one. And also, we touched base off air a little bit about chemtrails, and I thought it'd be interesting to kind of give the listeners a little bit of an impression of what you think's going on with chemtrails. Because when I was just out in California, it was amazing because I didn't see any chemtrails by the ocean. But you said, obviously I wasn't there long enough. But it was wild because, I get slammed where I live out here. We're constantly getting inundated with chemtrails.
Yeah, and it does appear and this is just my opinion, I can't say that I have this verified or anything, but it does seem to be some kind of tactical positioning or device, more so than a let's kill everyone method, because it's very inefficient. So there's so many correlating reports with excessive trails during military movements that are then verified in the news. I mean, even recently, you can see that a lot. I'm sure a lot of the listeners out there right now will probably be able to correlate some of that too, especially with all the saber rattling going on down here on Earth. So it seems to correlate heavily with that, or when there's political appearances, and it does. And now there's a couple of different scientific applications where I can see that would be an advantage, because from a frequency level, and we know things like HAARP are in existence, and that kind of technology can be employed through all cell phone arrays and things like that. you can use that to excite that whatever's up there and make it hard to see down through, unless you happen to have the modulation code to get through it. So I can see how it would work great as a keep spies from spy satellites or anything from watching that you don't want to see.
Right, like bouncing the radar signals, etc.
Yeah,
that makes sense. What's your take on the nanoparticles that some people say are connected into the dispersing of chemtrails in general, the spray?
I mean, it would make sense to me because just even knowing what I know about nanomaterials, if you have the right modulation codes, you can get those little things to hop around and do whatever you want. And inherently that sounds intimidating and scary, but at the same time, it's not necessarily that easy. You know what I mean? And then number two, there's untold amounts of doomsday devices littered about the planet already. And the fact that they don't happen, you have to ask why.
Right.
And it does work. Everything from logical thinking to God doesn't want it. It'll all match at one point. It's just amazing. Actually, even I found in my experiences and just researching others, it seems like the general flow of our existence wants to perpetuate. And damned if the thoughts that we form don't really help that. You know?
Very, very true. Yeah, it magnifies. There's no doubt about it. That's why I wonder, it's good to be a neutral positive to some degree, but also be, situational awareness is critical as well. So what's your take on Fukushima? You think that's just over exaggerated? Or, I was out there in California. I was wondering about that with the oceans, and it seems like it's really not that bad, but has anybody really measured anything, or what's your take on it?
I've heard limited measurements on that, and some of the stuff that's reaching the mainstream now still fits into what, like some kind of peculiarities, I have to admit. And in file rights and purposes, we should have been hit with a lot more radioactivity over here, but we're not. And now I'm not sure why that is. I mean, especially considering we're seeing large dead sections of the ocean. So it could very well be even something like the, I'm forgetting the element right now, but some of these elements that are conventionally used to sort of soak up radioactive isotopes, I'm sure are present in the ocean. And so that could be part of what's yanking that into some of those salts and minerals there. And then it's all coagulating at the where the centrifugal harmony point on the planet would be. But then that doesn't necessarily explain the air, so there seems to be some mitigating factors that I think really warrants a discipline study.
Right, I agree. What comes to mind also, and I'm sure this is right up your alley, but literally using certain frequencies to clear the radiation. And I think John Hutchinson was working a little bit on that, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm a firm believer, as you probably are aware, that everything is frequency-based. We can heal or we can harm with frequency. And that would probably include something like Fukushima.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that, in a lot of ways, I can imagine that the technology to do so is probably already in existence.
Agreed.
And now then it begs a question, why wouldn't we use that? And I would say that just approximating is that, okay, let's say that we know that we can, let's say, okay, let's just play that like we're quote unquote Illuminatis right now. And we have that ability. Let's look at that and say, okay, well, if we can subtly mitigate the damage to where it can look like natural causes or whatever, rather than exposing this technology that can just flip a switch and change everything, what's the benefit there? Because let's say what happens, let's flip the switch and change everything. Everyone's like, yay, no more radiation. But then it's going to be a fraction of a second later, everyone's going to realize, wait a minute, if you can flip off radiation, couldn't you flip off any other kind of compound too?
Right.
It's like, yes, you can. Yes.
And why do we even have nuclear power at that point in the continuum? Because we could just go with the free energy globally, like the original Tesla plan.
And actually, I want to broach Tesla in a second. But now, even just what I've seen in discussion with other colleagues, a lot of people in major business aren't necessarily using the grid's power. They have their own power generators. And some of these are even reclaimed generators from trash. So there's a lot of ecological work that goes into a lot of these major corporations. I think people realize, and they also are including hydrogen systems. In terms of electrolysis. So we're not even talking like far out hydrogen cells. We're just talking about zapping water with some electricity.
Right.
So all these things are there. And I honestly think that a lot of it has to do with the resistance of the population at large to new technology. Because a lot of people get scared, because how we had mentioned that scenario, if we could just flip off radioactivity, couldn't you just flip off people? It's like, well, yes. And then it's like, well, then how come it hasn't happened? I think people infer too much that it's going to happen instead of realizing that it hasn't. And there's an inherent interest, common interest of those who have that to not do it.
Right. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're not educated. Unfortunately, they haven't been educated in these areas, and they don't seek to learn new things. And nothing against the masses, but literally that's kind of what's going on here. So those of us who actually know all this stuff, we're like light years ahead of everything, in the illusion of. I agree with you, and nothing's worse than a slow death. And when I think about, you were talking about the chemtrails, and yeah, I mean it's a bad way to take people out, if you ask me. I mean, these slow kills. It's like the Chinese water torture. You just drip toxicity, and eventually people fade or something. But yeah. Very interesting. I wanted to say hi to Vanessa, by the way. If she's listening, I'm sure she is. I just appreciate her so much, too, and the work she does. Hi there.
Sarah.
Hi. And
Love you.
Love you, too. And it's great to hear your beautiful voice. And I know you're a little shy, but you shouldn't be, because you have a lovely voice on air, and you're very knowledgeable.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So shy.
That's why we make a great team. And that's what I think is fun. And in our experience, we really do have a practical view on that concept of twin flames and things like that, which works into a lot of fun genetic stuff as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah. So I just kind of want to mention real quick about how you're mentioning a sort of neutral view of things, and I like the way that's put. And I like to also sometimes think of things in the sense of maybe serene acceptance is also a good way to kind of think about things, even if they really suck. Meditate on that, because ultimately what we're experiencing is a type of harmonic wave. And so harmony, is a very literal term in relation to algorithms and wavelengths. And so being able to recognize that everything is in harmony doesn't necessarily mean yay, good stuff. It just means it creates a form which has some value and appreciation.
That makes a lot of sense right there. And it also comes to mind as intelligent energy, period. Even if it's in chaos, it seems like it knows how to work together in some form of combination. I mean, if you ask me, I think that's what's going on. Do you create algorithms yourself? You must, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and all kinds. I mean, everything from, some of the new quantum applications to computer programming and getting into hardware programming, things like that.
Excellent. Yeah. Brilliant mind. Do you have any books out?
No, actually, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because, I actually did have a book that I wrote, and it was a type of intuitive skill set book, and it was meant to be like just about 15 exercises detailed out that would increase one's environmental awareness at different states of being, including lucid dreaming. But then it disappeared. But I do have the outline, and so I figured, okay, I'll just wait till it's time to do this. Apparently, it's not. And but now, flash forward, and I've been really, getting into more computer programming because of the algorithmic exploration. And at the same time, I realized, wait a minute, I can probably accomplish even more in a sense and make it more entertaining if I did what I was going to do in a book as a video game.
Mm-hmm. Ooh,
So that's one of the newer projects I got going on right now, and is a set of tools that at different user levels to help tune up and verify one's prowess at, say, psychic function, whatever one might define that as. But either way, having these different games that you can play to, say, have something to check remote views, work on scrying, tune your third eye, things like that are stuff that I have in the works these days too.
Oh, I love that. Well, keep us posted on that because that sounds awesome. And people do need that. That's a nice little guide. I love video games too, by the way. I'm a nerd when it comes to that stuff. I've always loved it. And even though I got pulled into that covert program, I really like that kind of thing. And it never bothered me. I mean, it's amazing because it's good for hand-eye coordination. I mean, if people don't get too wrapped up in, and that's all they do 24 hours a day. But yeah, I'm real big on those things. And I think that, what comes to mind also is an application you can create for that on maybe an iPhone or something.
Oh yeah, because I have different ideas for both the different types of games like this, for both 2D and 3D applications. So they could be on phones, and then or more intricate versions for like the desktops.
Cool. Well, that sounds awesome. Yeah, you're gonna have to keep me informed on that one. So what happened? You said your book just disappeared. Did it get taken out of your computer, or what happened?
Yeah, it kind of got magically deleted from my computer and thumb drive.
Very interesting. So let me ask you this: do they access your computer, or has it been hacked before, or no?
Yeah. Oh man. This is some fun stuff. I like sharing this just because it's so out there. I didn't think this happens either. Mm-hmm. I have had my computer wiped out in front of me, just kind of like in the movies when someone's deleting your files off your computer. I've had that happen to me twice now. And now, at the same time, just to let people understand, obviously, I think it implies I have a fairly advanced knowledge of computers if I'm programming this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I work professionally as an IT support person, so I'm pretty good at setting up network stuff and things like that. And whatever came in left absolutely no trace. And like I said, I was literally watching everything delete off my computer while I'm talking to someone who happened to be, part of an intelligence group before and stuff like that.
That's funny.
Yeah, wow. and then now, and this just goes to show it is kind of like the movies, because whether one likes it or not, and this goes for everyone, you're an asset. So at one point, this group, associated with the United States intelligence and government, ask my opinion about something, and they send me a file, and they say, hey, have you seen this kind of thing before? And after you get done discussing, just delete the file and everything. I'm like, all right, no problem. I'm like, no, I'm not really that familiar. Oh, okay, fine. So I delete. I even do my disk cleanup and defrag. About 3 hours later, same damn thing happens.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's like, well, thanks, guys. Can you send back up?
You know what? You probably should have looked at their file. That was probably one of the problems, huh?
Well, I think it's just you weigh the variables of like how much, like if there's any plausibility of something not good happening from it being there, even as a trace, like they'll just not deal with it and just kind of just get rid of that possibility. And considering, I think that like those involved know that I would have it back up within X amount of hours anyways, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I get it. It's all good.
Those guys have the cool jobs, if you ask me, It's interesting. I know someone who actually has someone who supposedly works at Area 51 and literally comes in and does the same thing what you're talking about. He gets into her system and she can't get him out, man. He takes everything over. So, and once he comes in, he's there, and she has no control over anything.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is one of the things that, one of my colleagues in that regard had shared with me, that back in the early 2000s, that there commonly was employed things that could commandeer a computer to as far back in generation as like an Apple IIe remotely from, say, across the street, or bouncing it off of different satellite triangulations. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to, even if you're not connected to a network, it doesn't matter. Like you can, the other way you can kind of avert some of that is to literally just take out any network hardware in the device, and then it might be a little bit more difficult but only certain people would probably be able to get into it then, kind of thing.
That makes a lot of sense right there. Well, let us not forget the brain hacking, too, that they're capable of doing remotely, and triangulation of a target. So, take it up to another level of the brain itself being a supercomputer design, and that they do have access and can access, if they so choose, a certain person to hack in. Of course, I know that one pretty well. But, yeah, There's all sorts of stuff they can do. It's amazing. Anything electrical can be hacked, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that, you and I have spoke about personally many times about where it's not, in a sense, that hard for someone who knows what they're doing to do these kind of things. They're very malicious. And that there isn't any specific laws on a municipal level that makes it illegal. And so that's what is the problem. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's honestly why I care. It's like I'm Native American in every right of the word. And so that's just who I am. But at the same time, I recognize it's just part of this planet. And it doesn't mean, I don't assume America's right all the time. But at the same time, there is absolutely things and people out there that it's like, why wouldn't you let them do what they do? You know what I mean? Just kind of like what we see in the news. It's like some people choose to stop the robbers, some don't. And in this scenario, because it is rampant, and this is where the insidiousness is, it gets deeper than people think, because a lot of these major corporations who say may take the brunt of the recourse of the mind hacking, they are employing a branding package that was sold to them by someone that got it from someone, sold to them by someone who made that knowing what it was doing. But the other people don't. They just know it's effective at getting people's attention and making people buy shit or stuff. I don't know.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Well, yeah, I can see that. Well, they do have the black market technologies as well, and just from where I've been with the covert technology and synthetic telepathy, I'm well aware that they sell those templates. They sell that database. Yeah, it's all sorts of stuff going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And now, I'm not sure how much research listeners here have done into the black web or the dark webs, but it's interesting other side of the internet community. And you can see by and large that everyone's pretty much the same. And at the same time, how there's this connotation of drugs and child porn and stuff like that. But in a lot of ways, I can see how it's like the perfect tool to get those people, because there's only so many reasons and ways to find those places on the dark web. It's not like the regular internet with Google. And in that sense, when tracking dark web stuff, and even like Wired does articles on it and such, and you see how that correlates to who is being sort of picked up in the media and news and stuff like that, you start seeing these cross correlations, and it's pretty interesting, because in my mind, what that does say is that that change of guard or sort of change of attitude that everyone's witnessing, it really is happening, and there's a lot happening behind the scenes too in that regard.
I agree. Yeah, it's a whole virtual universe there with the black web. Obviously, it's dangerous to go into the dark web. We don't encourage people to do this, because I think there are a lot of assassins, and it's just a really evil place from what I understand. Is there anything positive about that web?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And it's also where you're going to see people making sincere efforts in, say, researching ritual abuse, or psychic awareness, for that matter, hacking, both sides. You know what I mean? Black, gray, and white. And what's interesting is that those in the hacker community seem to be the most predominant. And out of that, the attitude is more about almost like equality or neutrality than it is like screw the man in that sense. So this is where it seems like a lot of the intel leaks to the major media streams about, like, say, like WikiLeaks or Snowden, stuff like that. A lot of it seems to come from there, because even the major news outlets have their dark web dead drops, things like that. So there is definitely a strong community of those who are aware, I would say.
Right.
And now the interesting thing to me that I found in my own research is that, okay, certain drugs, right, fairly popular, and all the usual suspects are on the higher portion of the list. But what I found kind of disturbing initially was that nuclear material had almost as many vendors as, say, actually it probably did have more vendors than, say, if you wanted to buy like mushrooms or something like that.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, like, why is there so much nuclear proliferation happening? And where is it coming from? And now one might think, dirty bombs, things like that. But you know what? It's like it's kind of a lame use. But then it started making more sense to me that how you could make small nuclear generators, though, if you got enough of it together, and it probably would be relatively low cost. So I'm guessing that there's probably a fair amount of rogue nuclear generators out there, more than there is like dirty bombs.
Right. And I'm beginning to wonder, I'm hoping that they're tracking this stuff, but you never know. Sometimes they're part of the problem and not the solution. I mean, there's always an orchestration to some degree, so you have to kind of, that duality's there in these covert divisions sometimes. So, yeah. So let me ask you something. With the average bear, for the average person who is wanting to access the dark web, how do you access it?
There is a free browser called Tor.
Okay, that one. Okay.
Yeah. And then if you're really concerned about things, you can sign up for a virtual private network, which in a sense masks your IP or your internet address for your computer. But technically, this is why I think it's so funny, is like in the media and how they portray things, like the dark web. Oh no! But there's not much there. And what anyone really wants to see, it's kind of like very specific. So it's like, if you want to see news, you're going to be very, very specific news. And so it's really more about privacy than anonymity in a lot of ways.
Right.
So one can't necessarily hide their identity to a certain degree. You know what I'm saying?
Right, exactly. And Jerry, hang on for a second. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back here, and we're going to continue this conversation. You're listening to Ravenstars Witching Hour. I'm Solaris BlueRaven. My wonderful guest tonight is Jerry Avalos. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll be right back.